My name is Kate Moncrief. I'm the chair of the English department and the chair of the Sophie Kerr Committee, and I'm really pleased to welcome you all to our first year book event with Claudia Rankine. A few thank yous I want to make. This event is co-sponsored by the Dean's Office, the Black Studies Program, and the Sophie Kerr Committee. I want to extend a special welcome to first-year students. I see so many of you here, and to peer mentors. You've all received a copy of Citizen over the summer, and everybody participated in small group discussions. A thank you as well to the faculty and staff members who took time to participate in this. I've heard from a lot of you. I've talked to a lot of my colleagues, and I've talked to a lot of students about how terrific these discussions were. So I hope you had your group was also lively and thoughtful like mine was. Okay, now I have to play housekeeping a little bit. Everybody take out your cell phones. Turn them off. And now put them away. Okay, good. So yeah, we don't want to be disruptive during the event. So please turn the cell phones off, put them away. We're going to have a whole hour where we don't look at our phones. It's super hard to do, but we're going to engage with the speaker and engage with each other. So I also then have the privilege of welcoming my colleague, James Hall. He's too humble to say so, but James did a whole lot of the work and the thinking in putting this event together. So we're going to give James a little round of applause. Yeah. And so James is going to come up to the podium, Professor Hall, and introduce Claudia for us. So welcome, everyone.
Hey, everybody. It's my great pleasure to welcome Claudia Rankine back to Washington College. She first visited the campus, I guess 5 years ago, she said, but reading from her fourth book, this beautiful book called Don't Let Me Be Lonely, which shares its subtitle with Citizen, An American Lyric. I first met Claudia when I was a student where she was teaching, and she gave a reading, and she signed my book because I was a fangirl. And I was an editor for a literary magazine at the time, so I was interested in getting some work from her, and I said, "So what are you writing right now?" And she said, Whatever this is, more of this. That's what I'm writing. Citizen is a blend of image and document and video and still and text that's sometimes broken into lines, sometimes moving unstopped through what looks like paragraphs but might be stanzas, or maybe little boats frozen for us on the iced-over page. The book freezes moments of racism in order to turn them back and toward the heat of analysis. Rankine has said that this, quote, ability to freeze the frame, literally she's talking about the scripts for the situation videos made in collaboration with the artist John Lucas, challenges the language of the script to meet the moment literally second by second. In the Zidane World Cup piece, for example, to know as the moment knows and not from outside. To know as the moment knows, and not from outside. Citizen brings us both interior and exterior at the same time. The reader is positioned in many of these pieces as the body upon which harm is done in micro and macro aggressions. We could just call them aggressions. Citizen extends an invitation to the reader to enter this body, to feel it, policed by other citizens, as well as the actual police. Get on the ground now, law tells us, because our body fits the description. Either the description or the way we read it is flawed, or both. Claudia said in an interview with the writer Lauren Berlant, "I am fascinated by affect, by positioning, and by intimacy. What happens when I stand close to you? What's your body going to do? What's my body going to do? On myriad levels, we are both going to fail each other and ourselves." Reading this poetry, more of this, saves me because it helps give me a language for the ways that I want to hold and to be held, and for the ways that I fail and am failed. It achieves an understanding of how I contain multitudes, to borrow Whitman's phrase, how I function both as a historical self and a self-self, to borrow the words of Claudia Rankine. Have you seen their faces? The speaker and citizen asks in the section concerning the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. This is a literature that helps me search for my historical self so that I may reposition it, so that history may not repeat itself, or may not repeat the self that I was. The body count of murdered black men and women in the United States is considerable, is unbearable, and Citizen says some of the names we are mourning, asking at the same time, how did we get here? Where do we go? How can our mourning be a way forward as well as a look back? We can read great works of literature like Citizen and learn how to do the work of empathy, which for me is the work of being a good citizen. Claudia Rankine was born in Jamaica and raised in Kingston and in New York City. She holds degrees from Williams College and Columbia University, and she has taught at some of the most prestigious universities in our nation. She is currently the Errol Arnold Professor of English at the University of Southern California at Dornsife. She has authored 5 collections of poetry, a play, and numerous video collaborations. Her work has received the Jackson Poetry Prize, the LA Times Book Award, and the National Book Critics Circle Award, that one for Citizen in Poetry. It was also nominated for Criticism for the National Book Critics Circle Award, the first time in its 50-year history that a book was double nominated. Thinking about all those years ago at Houston, I have to tell you, I am very glad that Claudia has written more of this. I admire her as a writer, as a teacher, and as an archivist of human thought and feeling, giving us ways to see, to read, to remember what we can't bear to forget. Please join me in welcoming Claudia Rankine.
Good afternoon, you guys. It is such an honor to be here. And I have to say, a couple of places have used Citizen as their first year book, but you are the first. And so I feel like this is a great honor. Thank you. I'm going to start by reading for about a half an hour, and then we'll have a Q&A. So if you have questions, just hold them. The way this book began, first of all, I want to thank James before I move forward, because one of the great things about having colleagues out in the world that you admire is that you suddenly are in a community where your work and their work are doing the same work. And I feel that way about James Hall, so thank you, thank you. The way Citizen got some of it, the different sections began in different ways, but I'll begin with the first section. And the way that came about was I called up my friends. I'm really into my friends. I like my friends. And I said to them, tell me a moment when you were doing something very ordinary. You were with friends, you were with colleagues, you were going to get a slice of pizza, and suddenly somebody said or did something and made you understand that you had been reduced to the color of your skin, and that racism had stepped into the moment. and change the entire complexion of that moment. So these moments were collected and written down. Some of them came from people answering that question, some of them came from my own life. So I'll start first with one that came from a friend. You're in the dark, in the car, watching the black, tarred street being swallowed by speed. He tells you his dean is making him hire a person of color when there are so many great writers out there. You think maybe this is an experiment and you are being tested or retroactively insulted, or you have done something that communicates this is an okay conversation to be having. Why do you feel comfortable saying this to me? You wish the light would turn red or a police siren would go off so you could slam on the brakes, slam into the car ahead of you, fly forward so quickly both your faces would suddenly be exposed to the wind. As usual, you drive straight through the moment with the expected backing off of what was previously said. It is not only that confrontation is headache-producing, it is also that you have a destination that doesn't include acting like this moment isn't inhabitable, hasn't happened before, and the before isn't part of the now as the night darkens and the time shortens between where we are and where we are going. One of the things that was interesting to me about these stories, this didn't happen to me, but my second job was at Columbia at Barnard. And when I was hired, a writer in New York, a poet, a white woman, she called me and she said, "Will you have lunch with me?" And I said, "Sure, sounds nice." And so we met on Broadway for lunch, and she said to me, "Did you know that job that you just got, that it was my job?" And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting since it's my job, but okay." She said, "You only got that job because you're black." And so I was summoned to lunch to be told that. And then fast forward 20 years, I'm given a reading, and I've read this very piece of writing, this story that doesn't belong to me, it belongs to someone else. And then I'm sitting at dinner, and just by kismet, I'm sitting next to that woman. And she turns to me and she says, "You read that piece about hiring a person of color, that thing? And I was thinking, I have probably said stuff like that in my life." And I said, "Yes, to me." When you're alone and too tired even to turn on any of your devices, you let yourself linger in a past stacked among your pillows. Usually you are nestled under blankets and the house is empty. Sometimes the moon is missing, and beyond the windows the low gray ceiling seems approachable. Its dark light dims in degrees depending on the density of clouds, and you fall back into that which gets reconstructed as metaphor. The root is often associative. You smell good. You are 12, attending St. Philip and James School on White Plains Road, and the girl sitting in the seat behind asks you to lean to the right during exams so she can copy what you have written. Sister Evelyn is in the habit of taping the hundreds and the failing grades to the coat closet doors. The girl is Catholic with waist-length brown hair. You can't remember her name. Mary, Catherine. You never really speak except for the time she makes her requests. And later, when she tells you, you smell good and have features more like a white person. You assume she thinks she is thanking you for letting her cheat and feels better cheating from an almost white person. Sister Evelyn never figures out your arrangement, perhaps because you never turn around to copy Mary Catherine's answers. Sister Evelyn must think these two girls think a lot alike, or she cares less about cheating and more about humiliation, or she never actually saw you sitting there. That did happen. I often wonder what happened to that now woman. In the book, that image, that piece, is followed by this image. And I saw this in the portfolio of a photographer, and I said, "Did you Photoshop that?" And he said, "No, you want to go there?" And apparently it's in Flowery Branch, Georgia. You could buy a house, a white house, on Jim Crow Street. And when you ask them why it's called Jim Crow Street, they say, well, it was named after James Crow. And so then I said, did you ask them why didn't they name the street James Crow? And he said he did. And they said, because we call him Jim. So there we have it. You and your partner go to see the film, The House We Live In. You ask a friend to pick up your child from school. On your way home, your phone rings. Your neighbor tells you he is standing at his window watching a menacing black guy casing both your homes. The guy is walking back and forth, talking to himself, and seems disturbed. You tell your neighbor that your friend, whom he has met, is babysitting. He says, no, it's not him. He's met your friend, and this isn't that nice young man. Anyway, he wants you to know. He's called the police. Your partner calls your friend and asks him if there's a guy walking back and forth in front of your home. Your friend says that if anyone were outside, he would see him because he is standing outside. You hear the sirens through the speakerphone. Your friend is speaking to your neighbor when you arrive home. The 4 police cars are gone. Your neighbor has apologized to your friend and is now apologizing to you. Feeling somewhat responsible for the actions of your neighbor, you clumsily tell your friend that the next time he wants to talk on the phone, he should just go in the backyard. He looks at you a long minute before saying he can speak on the phone wherever he wants. Yes, of course, you say. Yes, of course. So in that, I am the brilliant one who said, just go in the backyard. And it's one of those moments that I have, I don't know if you have this happen to you, but when you step into a moment of shame and then your body heats up and you feel the heat just rising up. And so by the time he said, he was halfway through, I could talk on the phone wherever I want, my face was burning up. And it's that moment when you realize that you cannot, as a black person, restructure your life because of white racism, right? That it's a denial of your own humanity. And for me to say to him, go into the backyard, was for me to say, even though it was coming from a place of, I don't trust the police and I need you to stay alive. At any moment, anything could happen. Guns could come out and I could have come home and you would be dead over the mistake of my neighbor. So that was what was motivating me. But nonetheless, it wasn't fair to limit his movement, right? And to curtail his own freedom inside his life. So it was a big lesson for me, actually, that moment. In the telling of the stories, there was only one story that I didn't have a counterpart to, like my own. Often I had a person tell me a story, and then I had a story that I myself had experienced that was not dissimilar in one way or another. But there was one story that I was really flabbergasted when the person told me. The nude therapist specializes in trauma counseling. You have only ever spoken on the phone. Her house has a side gate that leads to a back entrance she uses for patients. You walk down a path bordered on both sides with deer grass and rosemary to the gate, which turns out to be locked. At the front door, the bell is a small round disc that you press firmly. When the door finally opens, the woman standing there yells at the top of her lungs, "Get away from my house! What are you doing in my yard?" It's as if a wounded Doberman Pinscher or a German Shepherd has gained the power of speech. And though you back up a few steps, you manage to tell her you have an appointment. You have an appointment? She spits back. Then she pauses. Everything pauses. "Oh," she says, followed by, "Oh yes, that's right. I am sorry. I am so, so sorry." When the woman who told me that is a professor in Northern California. And when she told me, I was shocked. I think because we expect from therapists, James was talking about empathy, you expect from therapists a higher level of consciousness somehow because you're trusting your own emotional state to them. And so you feel, how could it be that one of these fine people would do something like this? And I said to her, "Well, what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I went to the appointment." And I was like, "No, you didn't." But probably I would have done the same thing. Because you're in the moment and you do the next thing, right? Whatever is the next thing, you do the next thing. Even when you feel incredibly injured. And so then I said, "Well, then what happened?" And she said, "Well, afterwards I went home and I wept. I just cried." And then, she said partly out of disappointment because she had thought she had found the therapist that she was looking for. And then she wrote a letter saying that she wasn't coming back. So I said, "Then you made another appointment?" And she said, "Yeah, I had made another appointment." And I think this is how these aggressions work. You get caught in the moment. Nobody wants to make anybody else uncomfortable. Nobody wants to step out and say, what you have done is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Because then the person, how is that person going to react? They're going to react by being self-defensive. Or they're going to gaslight you and say, "What are you talking about?" When you know you have just experienced that moment, right? And so we don't want to have to engage. But it's really time, I think, we begin to think about our own comfort. I mean, as women, as people of color, as queer people, We cannot let the dominant culture curtail our humanity and then call that level of aggression and violence normal. You know, it's really unacceptable to allow those moments of aggression to be read as normal. That piece is followed by this image, the image on the right. The woman who does this is a taxidermist. She buys hide and casts face and puts them and makes the sculpture. And her name is Kate Clark, and I said to Kate, I had seen that, and I said, I'd like to buy the rights for that. I want it in this book. And she said to me, can I read the book? So I sent her the book, and she read the book. And she said, well, why don't I make one for you, specifically for the book? So she made this. And she said, I wanted to make it so that it was alive and beautiful. But I said, I don't want that. What I want is that. And the reason, do you see the difference in terms of the affect in the face? Because I was thinking, one of the things I often think about is the way that Black people are called animals. You know, they're animals. You know, like if you see the kids rioting in Baltimore, they're animals. What's wrong with those animals? Why can't they behave themselves? Why can't they act white? And I thought, all right, I'm not going to run from this idea that I'm an animal, but I'm going to choose the animal that I am. And I'm going to choose one that gets hunted. And so that was the one we ended up using. So this is, you all must know that this is a really big week for Serena Williams. Yeah. And I met her. It's very exciting for me, actually. She has 2 more matches, and if she wins those 2 matches, she will have a career Grand Slam, which means she will have won all 4 majors in the same year. But in her case, it will be her 5th major in a row, which in some kind of funny way is sort of poetic justice, but I won't go into that. So there's an essay, as you know, in Citizen about that, so I'm going to read a little bit from that. What does a victorious or defeated Black woman's body in a historically white space look like? Serena and her big sister Venus Williams brought to mind Zora Neale Hurston's "I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background." This appropriated line, stenciled on canvas by Glenn Ligon, who used plastic letter stencils, smudging oil sticks, and graphite to transform the words into abstractions, seems to be ad copy for some aspect of life for all Black people. Hurston's statement has been played out on the big screen by Serena and Venus. They win sometimes, they lose sometimes, they've been injured, they've been happy, they've been sad, ignored, booed mightily. They've been cheered, and through it all, and evident to all, were those people who were enraged that they were there at all. Graphite against a sharp white background. For years, you attribute to Serena Williams a kind of resilience appropriate only to those who exist in celluloid. Neither her father, nor her mother, nor her sister, nor Jehovah her God, nor Nike Camp could shield her ultimately from people who felt her Black body didn't belong on their court, in their world. From the start, many made it clear Serena would have done better struggling to survive in the 2-dimensionality of a Millet painting, rather than on their tennis court. Better to put all that strength to work in their fantasy of her working the land, rather than be caught up in the turbulence of our ancient dramas, like a ship fighting a storm in a Turner seascape. In the text, that image on the right is by the artist Nick Cave. And I wanted to include it in the Serena section, partly just because of the underbelly decorated on top. That's another example of the kind of work that he does. When I first saw Nick Cave's work, I was really fascinated by what he was doing. You can, in the early days when you went to his shows, he had these suits and you got in them and it covered you completely. So you couldn't see anyone's faces. And I thought, what's he up to? What's this? But there was no mention of anything. It was all like music and people putting on the sound suits. They're called sound suits because many of them are made of branches and they make sound when you move around in them. So I went back and found every interview he had ever given. And it turned out that the reason he started making these sound suits, does anybody know why? It was because of Rodney King. After the beating of Rodney King, and we all saw, I know you guys are young, but have you seen the video of Rodney King being kicked by the policeman on the ground? And that was the moment that sparked the LA riots. So Nick Cave saw that and was so demoralized that he thought that he needed to create something that would cover over the black body so that people would deal with black people as something else. And that rage and dismissal and desire to kill black people would be displaced by a moment of surrealness. There's a critic, Robin Kelly, who says that the only way we're going to get out of this historical legacy of white supremacist thinking that has infiltrated the structures of American culture is to make some kind of leap, a surrealist leap. And so Nick Cave enacted that kind of surrealist leap beyond the white imagination and its inabilities to see the black body as a human body. The other image that's inside the Serena essay is this image of Caroline Wozniacki, who is a friend of Serena's, actually. And when she did this, stuffed her bra and her buttocks with these towels, she thought she was making a joke. But the media immediately said, that's racist. Why are you mocking Serena Williams? In many ways, I don't think I would have written this book if President Obama hadn't been elected. I think one of the things that drove me to want to write the book was that for the first time, you know how people, they say, well, if black men only dressed better, they wouldn't be treated this way. If they only were more educated, they wouldn't be treated this way. It's just that they're wearing the hoodie or they're behaving that's why they're treated that way. And then suddenly, we have a president who is a black man, and he's treated that way. I'm sure you heard the story that he was at a dinner with Michelle, with the First Lady, and somebody handed him their drink when they were done with it. So then you realize it has nothing to do with what you wear. It has nothing to do with how you've been educated. It only has to do with the color of your skin. My brothers are notorious. They have not been to prison. They have been imprisoned. The prison is not a place you enter. It is no place. My brothers are notorious. They do regular things like wait. On my birthday, they say my name. They will never forget that we are named. What is that memory? The days of our childhood together were steep steps into a collapsing mind. It looked like we rescued ourselves, were rescued. Then there are these days, each day of our adult lives. They will never forget our way through, these brothers, each brother, my dearest brothers, dear heart. Your hearts are broken. This is not a secret, though there are secrets, and as yet I do not understand how my own sorrow has turned into my brothers' hearts. The hearts of my brothers are broken. If I knew another way to be, I would call up a brother. I would hear myself saying, my brother, my dearest brothers, dear heart. On the tip of a tongue, one note following another is another path, another dawn, where the pink sky is the bloodshot of struck, of sleepless, of sorry, of senseless. Shush. Those years of and before me and my brothers, the years of passage, plantation, migration, of Jim Crow segregation, of poverty, inner cities, profiling of 1 in 3, 2 jobs, boy, hey boy, each a felony, accumulate into the hours inside our lives where we are all caught hanging, the rope inside us, the tree inside us, its roots, our limbs, a throat sliced through. And when we open our mouth to speak, blossoms, oh blossoms, no place coming out. Brother, dear brother, that kind of blue. The sky is the silence of brothers all the days leading up to my call. If I called, I'd say goodbye before I broke the goodbye. I say goodbye before anyone can hang up. Don't hang up. My brother hangs up, though he's there. I keep talking, the talk keeps him there. The sky is blue, kind of blue, the day is hot. Is it cold? Are you cold? It does get cool. Is it cool? Are you cool? My brother is completed by sky. The sky is his silence. Eventually he says, it is raining down, it was raining, it stopped raining, it is raining down. He won't hang up. He's there. Goodbye, I say. I break the goodbye. I say goodbye before anyone can hang up. Don't hang up. Wait with me. Wait with me, though the waiting might be the call of goodbyes. That piece is followed by this image. Again, I know it was a long time ago. So do you remember, this image is in Indiana. It was the lynching of those 2 guys. Trying to get the rights to this image was impossible. They kept turning me down. They said, no, you can't have it. And so finally I was like, well, why can't I have it? Why can't I use it? And they said, because if you're we don't want white supremacists using this image in support of their shenanigans. Basically. They didn't use the word shenanigans. And I said, but I'm not a white supremacist. And they were like, well, we don't know that. And so, so I had to send the text again. I sent the text to them and they read the text. And then they said, okay, you can buy the rights to this. So, but I didn't really want this. This is not what I wanted. I wanted that, which meant I would have to Photoshop those 2 lynched bodies out of this image. And I was very nervous, but I called them up. I said, I know you said I could use the image, but is it okay if I alter the image? And they're like, alter how? And I said, take out the bodies. And they were like, sure. Because for them, it's that they're afraid will be misused, right? In support of the further killing of black people. So they were fine with that. And I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in those people, which basically is you people. That sense of the ways in which the white imagination is in collusion with white supremacist thinking. Nobody, I'm sure, in this room would go out and lynch another black person, but you will stand around and listen to other white people talk about black bodies, Hispanic bodies, queer bodies in ways that are unacceptable. You will stand there, you will listen, and maybe you will participate. If not, begin the conversation yourself. And I think, we can do whatever we want to do. But we should be conscious about what we're doing and where it comes from. I'm going to end, before we have I'm going to read one more piece. A friend of mine just got a job in New York. And he just moved to New York. He'd never lived in New York before. And he is now working at Columbia University. And he just, 2 weeks ago, he got this, he started the job. And I get a text on my phone. And the text says, I'm on the number 2 train, and I'm sitting in the seat next to the empty seat. And of course, he's a black man. So I text back and I said, if I were on that train, I would sit next to you. On the train, the woman standing makes you understand there are no seats available. And, in fact, there is one. Is the woman getting off at the next stop? No. She would rather stand all the way to Union Station. The space next to the man is the pause in a conversation you are suddenly rushing to fill. You step quickly over the woman's fear, a fear she shares. You let her have it. The man doesn't acknowledge you as you sit down because the man knows more about the unoccupied seat than you do. For him, you imagine it is more like breath than wonder. He has had to think about it so much, you wouldn't call it thought. When another passenger leaves his seat and the standing woman sits, you glance over at the man. He's gazing out the window into what looks like darkness. You sit next to the man on the train, bus, in the plane, waiting room, anywhere. He could be forsaken. You put your body there in proximity to, adjacent to, alongside, within. You don't speak unless you are spoken to, and your body speaks to the space you fill, and you keep trying to fill it, except the space belongs to the body of the man next to you, not to you. Where he goes, the space follows him. If the man left his seat before Union Station, you would simply be a person in a seat on the train. You would cease to struggle against the unoccupied seat. When, where, why, the space won't lose its meaning. You imagine if the man spoke to you, he would say, it's okay, I'm okay, you don't need to sit here. You don't need to sit, and you sit and look past him into the darkness. The train is moving through a tunnel. All the while, the darkness allows you to look at him. Does he feel you looking at him? You suspect so. What does suspicion mean? What does suspicion do? The soft gray-green of your cotton coat touches the sleeve of him. You are shoulder to shoulder, though standing. You could feel shadowed. You sit to repair whom? Who? You erase that thought. And it might be too late for that. It might forever be too late or too early. The train moves too fast for your eyes to adjust to anything beyond the man, the window, the tile tunnel, its slick darkness. Occasionally, a white light flickers by like a displaced sound. From across the aisle tracks room harbor world, a woman asks a man in the rows ahead if he would mind switching seats. She wishes to sit with her daughter or son. You hear, but you don't hear, you can't see. It's then the man next to you turns to you. And as if from inside your own head, you agree that if anyone asks you to move, you'll tell them, we are traveling as a family. Thank you so much for your attention.
Are there any questions for Professor Rankine? There's one all the way in the back there to the left. Yeah, sure.
So, do you think that combating systemic racism is something that should stay within the realm of like societal attitudes and ethical attitudes, or do you think there's any political policy or public policy that could be enacted there?
That's a good question. I mean, the thing, I think there are two ways of thinking about it. One, the civil rights movement was about public policy, yeah? Putting in place legislation to combat systemic racism, to address the inequities that are inherent within the society. One of the things that I love about the new Black Lives Matter movement is that it's not legislatively driven. It's interested in affect, it's interested in feeling. It wants us to look into the interior spaces of our lives. And so when Black Lives Matter, and you know, Black Lives Matter is not populated by only black bodies, they're white bodies, they're Asian bodies, everybody's inside that movement. And what they do is they come in and they interrupt the safe space of whiteness. So they're going into the opera, they're going into the theater, they're going into restaurants, and they're saying, while you can move along in your life, pretending that black bodies are not in peril, we're going to stand here and interrupt that knowledge. And so they're actually asking for a change in consciousness so that whiteness will stop behaving like white equals normal, and rather that white equals privilege, right? That the space of whiteness is really just a space of privilege in which their own bodies are being protected by a system that was put in place to do that, while other bodies don't belong to that space. And so when Black Lives Matter goes in, they're saying just have some consciousness about what's going on out there. And so that's the difference, I think, you know, that it's really about, even though we've had movements that have asked for legislative change, the Black Lives Matter is now actually asking for a change in consciousness, because the big question is, even with the legislative change, things have not changed, right? Even with the black president, things have not changed. So clearly, the systemic racism is inside all of us, is being propped up and marketed by whiteness day in and day out, so that it has lost its visibility to decent folks, if you know what I mean. Does that answer your question? Great. All right, I see a hand right there.
How do you define whiteness?
And then I see another hand over there. How do I define whiteness? How do you define it? Let's compare notes. How do you define it?
As you're speaking, I'm curious because can you stand up so everyone can hear? Especially in America.
Stand up. We don't have any mics, sorry.
I'm just curious because in America, there's so many cultures that came together, and no one's really like pure anything except pure American. Mm-hmm. So when you say whiteness, like someone who may have a European dad or in like a black mom, what is that white? If they're like, and so I'm curious like where real whiteness is and how you define what whiteness is in society.
That's a good question. You know, there's a great article by Cornel West that says that when you're in Europe, you're Italian, you're French, you're British, you're Scottish, you're Irish, whatever, you know, you're a Spaniard. You come to the United States and suddenly you're white. And not only are you white, you know, you check the box. When you get the box, you check it. There's not like white but of Scottish descent. It just says white, right? And it means, for me, that means that you are able to move through this life with all the privileges that whiteness is accorded in the United States. That nobody's going to stop you and ask you to get out of your car and then say to you, get your license, and when you go to get your license, they shoot you. Did you see that video? So that's what I mean. That there is this space of privilege that is accorded the white body. You know, my husband, who is white, had this funny moment where we were with somebody else and that person, we were in the car and that person went to get into the building. And when he went, they wouldn't buzz it, you know, so they kept saying to him, you have to stand in front of the camera, or whatever. And then they buzzed him in, and then we were after that. And then my husband went, and a white woman was coming out the door, and she just held the door open, and he went in, and he said to her, would you have let the other guy in? And she didn't say anything, but she wouldn't have. And so it's the past that whiteness has in this culture. And I mean, does that make sense to you? Not really? I mean, you don't feel that you yourself are privileged in any way in terms of your dealings, your data? Do you think that you would be pulled over and shot like the black men that have been shot recently? But what about Sandra Bland, who died in her cell the other day? You don't think that? I've been pulled over many times. My husband has been pulled over because I was in the car. The policeman said to him, how do you know her? How do you know your wife? How do you know her? Has that happened to you? And I'm not being facetious. I'm just saying that there is a way in which we're talking about incommensurable experiences. You can say to me, I don't understand why you're saying that, because you don't live in a body that is not the privileged body. And part of privilege is to believe that your body and the way your body moves through space in this world is normal. That's what privilege is. It allows whiteness to feel like the life that it's living is a normal life. And so then, from that position of privilege, you turn back onto the next person and say, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Without any consideration that you actually are being allowed the freedom to move in the way that you move. So, but I also understand that you don't understand that. You know what I mean? Like, I get it because you don't live the other life. You're not living it day in and day out. So how could you understand it? How could you know what it feels like? To think that if I let my son out the door, he could be killed for walking while black. it's a very different life that people of color live in this country. And it's not only perpetrated by white bodies. Black policemen do the same thing, because it's inside the system. So they too will attack other black people. We do hear about it. In Baltimore, 3 of the gentlemen who were prosecuted are black. Do you remember that? Do you guys remember that? 3 of them are black.
I heard the Baltimore riots, there was a girl killed, a little small girl.
Mm-hmm.
Her family, I believe, one of the black people went around shooting, and they shot through her house and they killed her.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very short paragraph on the news, and it was just blown away by the Baltimore riots.
So what is your point?
You don't really hear about other black people killing other black people. You just hear more about how white people are killing.
I agree, and you know why? Because black people don't matter. So what we get is what the news allows, right? And so black and black crime inside black communities is dismissed, because if black people want to kill black people, who gives an F? Who cares? And so it doesn't get covered. It doesn't get covered, I agree with you. And that's another part of what's systemic about the dismissal of black bodies. You know, remember that crazy black guy that killed the 2 white policemen? What did he do before he killed the 2 white policemen? Does anybody know what he did before he killed the 2 white policemen in New York? He killed his black girlfriend. That's what I'm talking about. That was in the story too, but you don't remember that. You remember that he killed the 2 white policemen, but you don't remember that the black girlfriend was killed first, because it doesn't matter. Her body doesn't matter. You're right.
Also, I know a lot of, I live in a community down in Maryland.
Mm-hmm.
Dad at the station, I live in an all-black community,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm the only white person.
Mm-hmm.
I walk down the street, I know everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no problem going outside each and every night and not worrying about if I'm going to get shot up. I know highly sophisticated black people, and I know highly sophisticated white people, but I also know very low-life white people and very low-life black people.
Right, everybody's capable of everything.
You don't really hear about the low-life white people doing stuff.
That's, again, exactly.
You just hear about the low-life black people.
I know, if you took the actual numbers of who's in prison, there are more white people in prison than black people. But every image you see on television is what? A black person. If you went across the Midwest, to prisons across the Midwest, outside of urban areas, those prisons are filled, like the women prisons, are filled with white women. Mostly drug-related crimes. A lot of them shouldn't be in there, but that's not the point. We don't see those images because whiteness doesn't market its own self as a criminal. It's not going to do that. You had your, yeah.
I was wondering if there's a specific piece of writing in this collection that sparked the collection as a whole. If you can remember at the beginning of this project, if there was one moment in writing that you realized was happening.
You know, if you had asked me this question yesterday, I wouldn't have been able to answer it. But today, I have an answer. Because last night, or was it last night? Yeah, last night I had a conversation with Carrie Mae Weems at the New York Public Library. And then somebody said to me, "How long have you been working on this book?" And I said, "I don't know, a few years." And then I thought, well, when was Katrina? And they said, "Oh, probably 10 years ago." And then I realized that's when it started. The Katrina piece, I think, was, do you guys remember that? That was the moment when you thought, oh my God, they're going to let all those black people die. They don't really care. They, the government, FEMA, And I think that it was that, I would say that that was the first piece, the first visual moment I had of the warehousing of black bodies. And then you had people like Barbara Bush saying things like, when they got to Texas, she said, this is working very well for them. These displaced people, this is working out pretty well for them. And then there were people, the commentator who said, these people are so poor and they're so black. And you start hearing these things in the media, and you're like, what? Is this the United States of America, or what? So I think that was the first piece that began to refocus my gaze. Let's put it that way. You're welcome. And then, well, two more. One, and then.
So I have a question about the book as a whole. Since you're acting as kind of a scribe for this series, did you ever want to quit while you were doing it because it was just too much for you to do?
You know, a lot of people ask the question, no. Because when I'm working, I don't really think about the content so much. I'm really interested in the language. So, you spend, and those of you who are writers know this, you spend a lot of time, months can go by, trying to figure out the right word. And I think there's a piece that ends with, I had this thing with a friend of mine who whenever I was over her house, she would, get distracted, and she would call me by the name of her housekeeper, who was a black woman. And every time she did it, I just felt like, pained, because I like this lady. She's a good friend of mine. And I really didn't want to not be her friend. But she kept doing this thing. And so then I couldn't end that piece. And then one day, it took me months and months, because I thought, what's the problem? You don't want to be called by, what's wrong with being confused with the housekeeper? If she was confusing you with her partner who was, let's say, a woman on the Supreme Court, would that be better, And so I didn't know how to get out of it. And then one day I was hiking with my dog, and the last line came to me. But it literally took me like 6 or 7 or 8 months. So you really begin to exist on the level of language. And that becomes like math problems in your head. Like how can you write a text that seems both transparent, but holds all of the history? And that comes with choice of words and the arrangement of things. And that's why you write, because language can do that. It can refuse. It can refuse a kind of not knowing, But you have to get the words in the right order. And you have to get the right ones. And you have to, I just finished this piece with the New York Times, and we had this thing where they would take the draft, it was that piece on Serena Williams, and then I had blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And then it would come back to me and it would say blah, 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 but blah, 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 blah. And then I would change it and it would say blah, 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 and blah, 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 blah. And then it would come back to me, blah, 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 but blah, 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 blah. And so finally I said, you keep changing my and to a but. I don't mean but. I mean and. This and this. And they were like, oh, okay. But that's where the time is. So I'm not sitting around sort of feeling bad. I'm sitting around trying to solve transparency. You know what I mean?
How did you decide on the cover, like the image
The image cover originally, all right, you can see it though. That's David Hammond's hoodie. He did this, a lot of people thought he did it in reference to Trayvon Martin. He did this in 93, I think it says so on here, 90, was it 93? Yeah, 93, in 1993, after Rodney King. And it's called In the Hood. And I think he was very well aware of the ways in which the hood could be an executioner's hood or in the hood being the neighborhood, all of the plays he was having on that. And because of that play, because it is both the thing that signifies criminality in the Black community, and it also is the executioner's hood. And it also is about the neighborhood. You know, like, what is the neighborhood? What is our neighborhood? So we add them all together, we get the United States of America. That's why I wanted that image. But it wasn't the first image. The first image was an image of Serena Williams, actually. And her people, her lawyers, said, no, you can't use this. And I'm glad they did, actually, because then it would have made the book about her. And this has much more symbolic, you know, it's like talking about language and the use of the word as opening out to the history, and this, to me, does that. Also, David Hammond has been critiquing American culture and systemic racism and white supremacist thinking all of his conceptual artist's brilliant life. So it seemed like a good place to start. Thank you all.
Claudia will be signing books out in the lobby, and books are for sale as well. Thank you all very much.